Welcome to the Homelab Show, episode 89, Rocky Linux interview. So, this is going to be a fun topic. We're going to talk about Rocky Linux, what it is, and some details about it. And we have a guest that'll be on here to help really bring that together for us. And me and Jay are pretty excited about this. We
Oh,
like
yeah.
some of these interviews. We hope to do a few more with experts in the field. And I'm going to throw it out there that our guest is definitely an expert in Rocky Linux.
I think that's fair to say.
Fair to say. I am, for those of you watching the live show, I'm jealous because I did get a Rocky Linux shirt as well. So did Jay. But I'm not wearing it. I didn't think to grab the other one. I left it at my office. But nonetheless, this is still going to be a fun interview. I want to get our sponsor mentioned real quick, and that is Linode. Yes, they've been sponsoring the show pretty much since the beginning. We've been really happy with them. This show is hosted on Linode. So if you downloaded this, you visited the homelab.show website, you will actually be pulling all that data right from a Linode server that we manage and maintain. We really thank them for being a sponsor of the show. And there's a link down below if you want to get started with Linode. It's a great place to host a lot of the projects we talk about on here. And just want to thank them again for sponsoring the show and keeping things going. All right, now let's bring in our guest, Greg.
Hi there.
How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
CIQ Rocky Linux. So tell me, Greg, what exactly do you do at Rocky Linux?
I do all the stuff that I think nobody else wants to do.
Also, you run the place.
the less fun stuff. I used to be like a developer, and my knowledge used to be relevant. When we started up Rocky, I realized that my age has caught up with me, and so I'm doing less of the development and tech with Rocky, and more of just kind of the organization, dealing with legals, dealing with foundation and community, etc.
I think those are really, really important because the best programmers aren't necessarily the ones who create an entire distribution, because it's a lot more than just talent in terms of writing good code. It's all about everything around it. Right. I kind of, it's easy to parallel that with Linus may be good at maintaining lots of the kernel stuff, but Linus is not the one running any of the major distributions. We thank him for his contributions. He's doing exactly what he's really talented at doing, but running everything else is actually, it's one of those, when I look at it, it's daunting to me to go, wow, like, how do you start a whole distribution and all that?
That's a big task.
In our case, it was actually fairly interesting. I just posted a comment to a blog, and the next thing I know, in about a month and a half, we've got 10,000 people asking how they can be part of it. It was, it was pretty surreal, actually.
Wow, and I can't even barely get my son to clean his room. Here you are getting 10,000 people to help you out. That's very impressive.
It was solving a kind of big pain point, and I think that's really what it was about. If it was right on the coattails of the announcement that CentOS is changing its focus and direction, and I think if I would have done it, an hour before or a day before, it wouldn't have gotten any interest.
Well, you never know. You got 10,000 people. I'm sure there'd be at least a few.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting because we talk a lot about this on channels, and any Linux discussion so frequently revolves around all the, lineage leading back to Debian. That's just the popular one out there, Ubuntu being that. And then from, you can spider out of a family tree of all the things related to Ubuntu. But when it comes to the enterprise market, and Red Hat, they were there first. They were the first distribution most of us cut our teeth on. If you happen to be starting in the 90s, that's where you started, was on Red Hat. And it's really embedded, because of their support and everything else, into the enterprise market. Lots of the tools that we use, or I should say projects we use, such as XCPNG being a favorite of mine, they base them on CentOS. So that announcement hit hard, more so than people may realize, to the enterprise environments that look for not the fanciest, latest features, but a very stable, secure base by which to keep building their product and going forward on there. So I think right place, right time, you're definitely right about that. But how's your feelings on supporting all this enterprise stuff and being the way forward for a lot of it?
Well, my background has been predominantly in enterprise and to be blunt, very stagnant portion of the ecosystem, which is, and I don't mean that as a negative at all, there's reasons for it, but in high performance computing, where I cut my teeth and spent most of my career, we don't just like do upgrades. Like, you know, we've got potentially hundreds or thousands of applications that we've custom compiled for your operating system that's running on thousands of nodes. That's not something that it's like you're just going to do a, you know, DNF upgrade on, right? You have to be very careful on, or do a whole distribution update on. You have to be very careful. We need something that has a very long life, because we're not going to be doing that upgrade very often at all. So from my perspective, the idea of something that rolls fast or moves fast is not something that's going to meet my needs.
I think this is a new user challenge as well. This is the Homelab show, but me and Jay and yourself here, we all have a lot of enterprise experience, and we value in the enterprise, as so does the people that often contract us, extreme stability. And not just because there's a small minor new shiny feature that got there doesn't mean we just, hey, let's rebuild the app to the new thing, and just because it's there, or updates for the sake of updates. It's all about that stability, security, long-term running, because there's a lot at stake when a server goes down or a hypervisor doesn't start up because we added some new feature that maybe we'll use in the future, but don't need right now. But we wanted to compile the latest version of this because it's new.
Yeah, we like new and shiny, well, to an extent, I guess, but not in some places we really just kind of want things to be status quo.
Yeah.
I've got a funny story. So I spent a long time in my career at Department of Energy at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. One of the projects I worked on was the Yucca Mountain project, and the Yucca Mountain project was a nuclear holding facility for the waste that we were generating. And they had this very long-term project to kind of figure out, like, what's the adverse effects of hosting, you know, all this nuclear data inside of a mountain, and what's that going to do? So lots of computation was being done. And when they qualified that computational code, they literally locked the operating system down to, I couldn't even upgrade SSH. Like, any change on the operating system would have required a reclassification or requalification on all of the applications that they were running on. And so it got to the point where it was like, okay, CVE hit, okay, security issue, whatnot. All right, at this point, we just have to firewall off that system from everything else, because we can't upgrade it. We can't do anything on it. But that's maybe extreme, but that's kind of typical in the enterprise space. Like, depending on where you are in that spectrum, you can't just make updates easily.
Yeah, you would think that they would know that, because they didn't give anyone much of any notice about what was happening to CentOS, knowing that, you know, their clientele, or the people that use the distribution, kind of really wants advanced notice, and they're also the type that'll be on CentOS 5 for probably the next 5 years without telling anyone. And now all of a sudden they're just gonna like go to CentOS Stream all of a sudden, just because that's the new normal. Like, I can't even believe they thought that's something people would gravitate to, given their audience. But here we are.
I think CentOS Stream really solves a good area within the ecosystem, but the problem is that it's not what everybody's come to love with CentOS and come to rely on with CentOS. But it is solving a huge need, which is you know, the community involvement closer to enterprise Linux. Right, we got Fedora, but Fedora is kind of far away from where enterprise Linux is in terms of you know, stability and whatnot. But CentOS Stream is much closer to that, and this gives the community this ability to have input into what's going into enterprise Linux and Red Hat.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a lot of value, but I think it's more or less like, surprise, you know, that's going to be the new thing for everyone, and it's like the people that were already using it will be just fine on it, but for those that, you know, it doesn't fit their needs, or they don't want to go that direction, that's a little awkward. But then, you know, we have Rocky Linux now, so it's not so bad.
Now, kind of going back to the story a little bit, you post on a forum. Now we have Rocky Linux. Let's talk about what happened in between. So how do you decide you're going to be the community leader and put all this together? Because, you know, we've all posted on forums. Wouldn't it be cool if there was something else? But the next step is where the real work takes place.
Yeah.
So I think Jay kind of touched on the nail on the head, which is, you know, this caused a major pain point across the ecosystem, as organizations were standardized on CentOS, and all of a sudden CentOS just changed. Rather, it went end of life, and the new project CentOS Stream is kind of continuing and getting the most of the focus. Created a major pain point. On the blog that was written where this was announced, there was almost 1,000 comments, and I challenge you to find any that's positive.
I've
Mhm.
read the comments, and there's hilarious comments, very angry comments, like from all different directions. And it's one of those things where I feel like if you've been following Linux, you kind of know what the comments are going to be already before you look at them. Then you just get confirmation as soon as you start diving in. But it's absolutely what you said.
And so when I announced on that blog as a comment, hey, I'm thinking of redoing this, and if anybody wants to come and join, I'm over here in this HPC Slack. And we went from a fairly small number of people that were already there to literally 10,000 plus
Wow.
within a month and a half. And I think the majority of those people tried DMing me directly. Um, let me share, like, going from 0 to 10,000 is an unmanageable problem. Like, it was like so overwhelming. And we were on the free tier of Slack. So if you're familiar with the free tier of Slack, you get 10,000 free messages before you buffer overflow, basically.
Uh-oh.
And so 10,000 messages when you have 10,000 people who are all active and new to a channel goes by like that. Like, I
Yeah.
would be scrolling down Slack and I'd see messages come in. And by the time I get there, I see it. It says I got new messages. I click on it and Slack's like, you've exhausted the 10,000 messages, pay to get to see this message. And so I was missing things as I couldn't get to it fast enough. I had messages on LinkedIn. I had emails coming in and I couldn't keep up. So one of the things that we did was is we basically said, okay, let's start breaking channels out into functional groups of where we know we need to focus on within creating an operating system. So we had, development, release engineering. We had marketing, and not marketing, well, community, I guess, more like socials, and we created all these things. Merchandise. Somebody came to the table and said, we want to help with merchandise, and so merchandise was there. And all of a sudden, all of these different groups started running in parallel. And within each one of these groups, a hierarchy started forming in terms of people that naturally assumed leadership positions and people that naturally assumed kind of individual contributor positions. And all of a sudden we had this meritocracy. It was a almost near perfect meritocracy where nobody knew anybody. Nobody had any idea who they were, what their background was. Most people were using avatars or aliases, so you didn't know anything about them. And we started to see a structure forming. And I did my best to basically just kind of guide each one of the different groups. And the next thing I know is we actually have a leadership structure in place. We have, a group of people that are taking on certain responsibilities to get stuff done. And then we basically then just started organizing ourselves. It took us 4 months to organize ourselves and to build the base infrastructure for creating an operating system. It took us 2 months to build the operating system once we've done that. And it took us a month of testing and whatnot before we actually released. So it was a 7-month total sprint to get the operating system released. And it was a lot of work, but it was also distributed across a fantastic team of individuals who came and wanted to be part of this.
And I think that's important. The community engagement is great. And that's where you really leveraged it and fostered it to create a thing. It's just, it's just kind of a fun story how they went from this idea to product, so to speak, or project, I should say, because it's open source, and being community driven like that. That is just an awesome story.
It's almost like it comes full circle because of, when Linus mentioned on a message board about the Linux thing and, the project, and now Rocky Linux starts as a comment in a forum post. It's like, maybe if I just want to start building a project or have some kind of success, I just need to start posting forum posts, I guess. It seemed like it worked out pretty well.
Again, I think it was because there was just a huge gaping hole in terms of where the ecosystem is now in terms of operating systems. And it was a pain point for everybody. And so coming forth and standing up and just saying, if anybody wants to do this, let's go talk about it over here. And then to see all these people want to be part of that. It was definitely, it was luck. It was just timing and whatnot. But it was also, Red Hat has done a lot for the community that's been fantastic. But this is not a prime example of one of them. I think this seemed like a very unilateral decision. Didn't seem like the community had much input into that. Because if they did, I think they would have had some foresight that this would be a very negatively responded, outcome.
Yeah, I think that's probably to be expected. But sometimes I don't know, what happened behind closed doors at Red Hat because I wasn't there. But sometimes I wonder these companies just come out with these ideas or this direction. Oh, everyone's going to love it. They're going to be right behind us because they just love it so much, and this is going to be awesome. But I have to have a feeling that they knew there would be rebuttals and there'd be some opposition to it. So I feel like it's just a weird situation all the way around because it changed the Linux landscape so much. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where we think a distribution is going to stay the same forever, but then when it's not, oh, wow, nobody saw that coming. What do we do? And some people can maybe embrace CentOS Stream, but others maybe they may not want to do that. And if they don't want to do that, then what do? And then you post a forum message, and the answer comes out of that. That's just so cool.
Now, how's your enterprise engagement been? I mean, I look on your page and I do see names we might familiar with, like VMware on there, and some other big names, AWS. How has the enterprise reception been to this? Like looking at it as a replacement for some of those that base things on CentOS.
Well, I think part of the reception that we got, both from community as well as enterprise, actually came from something that we just kind of touched on a little bit, which is um, how open source projects can be pivoted in a way that's not necessarily for the community. I mean, CentOS is by no means the first open source project that was pivoted by a commercial agenda, right? We don't know what the commercial agenda was, and it's not going to be the last. As a matter of fact, there's been at least two that I know of since CentOS that were fairly dramatic within the environment. But this goes all the way back to, I think MongoDB was the first time this kind of really was a big deal. And after CentOS, there was Elasticsearch, which was also end of life due to commercial. Redis.
Yep.
I mean, there's a bunch. They're eluding me because I still need to drink more coffee. But there was a bunch of them. And one thing that I heard of when I was talking to enterprises about what they're doing, what do they need, was they need stability. They need to know that what happened with CentOS, while CentOS was a fantastic operating system, this is not a slight to CentOS at all. It's
Right.
not going to happen again. Like, we need the benefits of what CentOS did right, but also the safeguards in terms of to make sure that this exact thing doesn't happen again.
Right.
And one thing that became very clear, and that is, I mean, I'm a CEO of a up and coming company called CIQ, and CIQ can't own this. Right. I don't want to own it. I don't want to control it. I don't want to hold it hostage from a CIQ perspective. It has to be community. Now, what's the best way of doing that? And we came up with some different models, and the teams had various different discussions about this. And something that a lot of people don't realize is CentOS originally came out of a nonprofit, 501c3. And a 501c3 is an actual nonprofit. It's a charity. The IRS doesn't usually give 501c3s anymore to open source projects, so they usually do 501c6s, which are different. But they don't, like, it came out of that 501c3. Like, a 501c3 or a nonprofit is not necessarily the best structure to protect an open source project, as we saw with CentOS. And there's been other examples of this as well. Freenode as well, which a lot of people know of.
Oh, yeah.
Before actually came out of a 501c3. It was the Peer Directed Projects. There was another C. I can't remember what it stood for now. But it was a nonprofit out of Texas. And do nonprofits really protect open source projects? And I don't think so. I think there's better structures that we can use. And so I created the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation. I promise this is a long way around of answering your question. I created the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation with the rest of the team to figure out, like, what's the best structure that we can use to protect this. And we came up with a model there that I wouldn't say it's drastically different than others, but I think there are some fairly important distinctions, like no single company can ever control this. Like, we have rules about how many companies or what percentage of any company can be on the board. Like, if you have more than 1/3 present, quorum is not made. We never sell board seats. That's a surefire way of basically having companies buy into manipulation of your project.
Right.
Many open source projects and foundations and nonprofits do this. I don't think it's the best for the project. I think that's a way of making money for a foundation, and I don't think that's what's best for the community. So we never sell board seats. Board seats are always provided and given and granted and voted, I should say, based on their the merit of the person, of the individual that's coming in to represent. But this model is what immediately attracted a number of different big companies. So you brought up VMware. AWS contacted us like shortly after I announced this vision and what it is that we're doing, and basically said, we want to be part of this. And
Wow.
they offered us a huge amount of help in terms of building this. And then Google came up and basically offered us as well a huge amount of help and support in doing this. Azure, exactly the same thing. VMware, Naver Cloud, and the list just kept continuing and growing. Now we even have sponsors that are not listed on the website because they don't want to come out as saying that they're competing with IBM or Red Hat, or doing something negative there. So we also have sponsors that are not, and helping the project, but they're not doing it necessarily completely publicly. I hope one day that changes, but at the moment, we have a huge amount of support, like a ridiculous amount of support. And it's just been so fantastic to be part of this and just see all of this grow and see all this come together.
And I think it's really important what you touched on with the structure. We started talking a little bit before the show, and I stopped myself because I actually wanted to save it for the show. But when I'm looking at something I want to use, because we are the Homelab show here, so we start there. But a lot of us, our goals usually as the home labbers are to get a job in enterprise, or maybe you already work in enterprise, and tinkering's fun in home lab. But when you really look at something, if I want to build a project, I want to start free PBX example. What do you want to base a phone system on? Well, it matters that foundation you start your project on going forward, because you need that long-term support. So I need to know that that project will be available, that project will going forward. You touched on Elasticsearch. That's created some issues with some of the products we use because they had that baked in and they switched it now to is it OpenSearch? I think it's whatever the replacement is, because you're right. There's corporate interests at play. And if there's not a good structure to hold it together as the community project, we lose it as a community project. And this has actually happened. Like you said, I haven't had enough coffee to remember all of them, but boy, the list is long. And I think it's just really important to think about that from the long term, because especially if you fall in love with the project, you're like, hey, I hope this whole distribution or this thing that's built on top of this other thing lasts for a while. But if there's no good structure to hold it together, there's no path forward long term. Corporate interests buy board seats. Corporate interests will use it for their own interests, or to some of these corporate companies, especially in the hyperscaler world, they have the kind of money where they can just mess up things and go, I'm done with this toy. And sorry, I broke your thing, community. We're going back over here. So,
oh my gosh.
Because like you said, we sometimes still don't know what exactly the intent was a few years later. And it's like, I don't know, someone had an idea, someone changed your mind, community, and broken for a little while.
Yeah, we've seen that. Yep, definitely. What's it like to build this? I mean, because I don't know if people really understand the weight of managing a distribution. It's not something people generally say, "Hey, I want to start a distribution today," as they wake up. I mean, maybe people do that, but it's got to be such a massive undertaking to maintain this. What's the build infrastructure like for this?
Well, there's two questions there. I'm going to address the first one, which is first, and I'll address the second. But the first one is, it takes a masochist to do this to themselves. And here's why. Like, if you look across the ecosystem, like, we have so many religions in our ecosystem, right? Vim versus Emacs, Perl versus Python. I mean, you could just go on. Nothing prepares you for the amount of religion to get stuck in the religious crusade of Linux distribution religion. And I mean, I'm guilty of this, just like everyone I think is to some extent. And it's to now all of a sudden, literally, I feel like I have a target on my back. Like, I'm getting attacked left and right. I'm getting people sticking up for me. I'm getting people talking, and I watch some of these threads, And I'm like, I see how conspiracy theories can form because I'm watching conspiracy theories happen about me. Like, oh, I'm going to go sell Rocky Linux to Red Hat next. And I'm going to go, and due to its structure, I'm the owner. And as a result, it's going to succumb to all of these things. And I mean, it's like, that's not me. Go talk
Yeah.
to people that have worked with me before spreading those rumors. Do a little bit of diligence because you're actually talking about a real person, and it
Yeah.
kind of sucks like to have all these people talking about me and other people on the team and trying to discredit it just because it goes against their religion, right? There goes against their personal preference. That's the first message I wanted to get out there. But also I wanted now to address your second question.
Well, I want to add one more thing. This is one thing I like about doing these interviews. I think we come across because me and Jave, as we engage with the community, we try not to be divisive at all. We like all the different distributions, and we wanted to humanize a lot of this. Like, there's people behind all these things that are going on here. We try to keep that very, real. Like, there's people and projects, and that's what we're talking about here. There's a lot of reality to it. It's not just some, it's easy when you can disassociate yourself and just see some posts or a website and go, oh, they're doing this thing or they're going to sell to this company. But no, this is real people. And that's why we're having this conversation. That's part of the reason we have you on here, to talk about it publicly.
That
Yes,
is so
absolutely.
awesome. I love that. Thank you for inviting me again because I really want to just, I don't know, help. It sounds so cliche, but just help people see that, I am a real person. Stop talking negative about me, please. Get to know me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so easy to reach. I have an open door to everybody who wants.
Just
I'm
not
mentoring.
10,000 at once. There's Slack
I will-
limitations.
There is that.
Yeah.
But to the second question, what does the infrastructure look like? This is a really kind of deep question as well, because I mean, when CentOS first started, it was literally like shell scripts running on somebody's personal server, personal workstations, building RPMs in a while loop. I mean, that was how simplistic
Wow.
the first versions were. Then we had an initial versions of CentOS. There was some build infrastructure put into place, but it was literally done by individuals, a lot of it by hand. I'd say the majority of it by hand. So when you think about the security aspects of this, the way you have to handle that is, well, you have to have a small team. And that small team has to be 100% trusted with the keys to the kingdom, right? You can't have anybody who can potentially put in a Trojan, do something wrong, do something malicious, because it's literally getting out to every single system, that's every single person that's running that. So you have to really control that that exposure surface there. So with CentOS, it started off initially just with, it's a small team. Other people asked if they can help, if they can be part of this, but it's kind of hard to let other people help and be part of that core development team. So with Rocky, one of the first things we all said and agreed on was, we have to figure out how to do this at scale such that the community at large can contribute to this. One of our mantras that we've already kind of talked a little bit about is, no single company can hold this hostage. And so no keys are owned by a company. Our secure boot shim, we started from scratch to go get from Microsoft and the powers that be, so that the RESF, the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation, has our own secure boot shims. No company can take that away. Our signing keys, I mean, domain, everything across the board had to be owned by the community and has to be controlled by that community. So that includes the infrastructure. So we had to create infrastructure and build and tools and tooling and whatnot, all from scratch. And that took us a while to do. It took us 4 months almost exactly to do. And so we built all of that up. Now, the first version, Rocky 8, started with the Fedora build environment, which is Koji, Punji, modular build system, and etc. We started with that. That system was designed not really in a cloud native way. It was designed to be built on, or for a single cluster. So you have a rack of systems, you've got a build cluster, and it's kind of more designed towards that. We didn't have a rack of systems, we have cloud. So we wanted to build everything in the cloud. So, we replicated a static system in the cloud, which is not ideal, but that's how we approached it. because we wanted to make sure that the output binaries of what we were creating were compatible and that the community at large can come in and contribute. What we learned from that is, I mean, Koji's fantastic, but it didn't really meet our needs perfectly. So we started building a cloud native build system, and we created something called Peridot. And we weren't sure at first exactly how this, everything was going to work. And so we did build it, initially. And I know that this is not typical open source, but we did build it initially kind of in a closed way, just with some developers working on a private repo. And then as it started to mature, we started bringing in, there was some more people that had visibility into it. And then, but we have a rule that no release of Rocky Linux can ever be built using not open source software. Somebody else needs to go and be able to build and replicate what we've done. And again, this is for the community to make sure that we are always a stable solution, because if something happens to us, I want to make sure somebody else can pick up from where we left off. So everything has to be completely open, transparent, and documented.
And I'll pause right there for a second, because this is a splitting hairs of open source that can be very aggravating, where there's a lot of companies that say they're open source, but they just don't give you any of the build pipeline information. So they just give you a lot of source code, but there's no way to actually build the software to an easy repeatable binary. And even in Debian, this has been a long time challenge, building those repeatable binaries so you can say, yes, this is truly the code and this is the outcome. And it's easy for a single executable to build that, but an operating system is entirely another level of that. So I think it's really important that you're doing that type of work, because this is where, I mean, I almost want to ask sometimes, is it open source? Because just because I have the code, I can slap the open source name on it, but that build pipeline is arguably as critical a component of it, because it goes through a secret machine that grinds up the sausage and outputs it. Trust me, it's exactly the code that went in, or is it?
Yeah, I've worked on a build system, or trying to migrate or reverse engineer, I should say, a build system for a project that was abandoned. And it was a really tough task. And that was just one binary.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a long time. But yeah, I could totally understand that being a lot of work.
So I'm of the strong belief that open source software, especially GPL software, which basically says that any derivatives of that source code must also be adhere to the license of the GPL. I believe that includes binaries, as a binary is a derivative of source code. So from that perspective, I don't believe binaries should ever be restricted as well. So when you look at that build pipeline and you look at everything that comes out, the whole thing has to be open source. The whole thing has to be repeatable. And again, coming out of science, in the scientific community, repeatable science is critical. If you don't have repeatable science, is it really, is it validated? Is it really science? So it has to be repeatable. It has to be open in such a way that other people can get the same results. We actually had a validation point. There's another Linux distribution, which is not very popular outside of China, but Circle Linux uses all of Rocky Linux build infrastructure to recreate, and they have a whole nother Linux distribution. And kudos to them, for doing that. And I love that they did it for a couple of reasons. One is it completely validates that vision that we had, which is this needs to be repeatable so other people can do this. And I've also now heard of at least one company that has a derivative of Rocky Linux by using the exact same tooling that we do. So this vision is I think very important to ensure the long-term stability of the operating system. And we also have other facets as well, like you have to be able to we're always distributing all of the requirements for every build, every package. So every package has build requirements, and in many cases, like Red Hat didn't always distribute all of the build requirements. So it made it very hard to repeat the builds, to repeat the binaries of what's in the operating system, because those were what we call hidden dependencies. In CentOS, in early days of CentOS, we vowed that we would never hide these build requirements, these hidden dependencies. We would never hide them. We'd always make them available. Later in CentOS's life, it did come up that some of these things were being hidden again after Red Hat acquired the project. And again, this is possibly some writing on the wall that things were changing. But we want to make sure with Rocky Linux that we never do that. So we put together our charter and everything else in such a way that it's going to be persisted. And we've actually even talked about, I think we need to host that a PDF or some output of that that charter on our mirrors. So every single mirror in the community will always have, like, this is a way of persisting it, so it can never just vanish and go away. Which is what happened with some of these early kind of ideas with CentOS and some of our early goals. It feels like they just kind of went away. So I want to make sure that Rocky Linux is always here to be stable for everybody. And we were talking about the build system. If you don't mind, I'll bounce back over there really quick, because what we did was super awesome. Like, we basically said, okay, we got Koji build system. It's kind of defined for a single system. It's hard to replicate. It's very complicated. It took us 4 months to do. Well, not entirely just that, also organization, but it took us a while to do. So how do we make this easier? How do we simplify this process and go completely cloud native? And that was where we spent a lot of time focusing. And the result of that is Peridot. And Peridot is a completely cloud native Kubernetes-based build system. I mean, we're not quite there yet in terms of simplicity of installing, but the goal is you can Helm install Peridot, and immediately, boom, you now have your build system, and you can start throwing packages at it. You can start doing Git operations against it and start building, packages for your operating system. Whether somebody's doing that in a commercial way via, a vendor is adding on to Rocky Linux via Peridot, or excuse me, or if somebody wants to just go and recreate it, just to make sure that there's redundancy within the community, which I think is a good thing. This gives everyone that confidence of stability, and so we released Peridot, and Rocky Linux 9 was built on Peridot. Rocky Linux 8 was built on Koji, and we're always talking about, do we move Rocky Linux 8 from Koji to Peridot? We want to make sure, again, in the vein of stability and nothing changing and nothing kind of rocking the boat, that we don't cause any sort of disturbance in the 8 track. Oh, that was a funny slip.
That was. That's a
in the 8 track of
the 8 tracks in your Homelab.
But we want to make sure that we don't interrupt that or do anything that may make that negative for our users, or change or break anything. So but we are talking about it because it would so simplify the maintenance of Rocky Linux version 8. So maybe at some point we'll see that. We're also seeing other things coming out for 8 as well. So FIPS, so my company, and this is one of the cool areas where having an open source project that a company doesn't control, that company has to add value if they're going to do anything worthwhile. So we're doing something called FIPS. I'm not sure if you're familiar with FIPS, but so we're doing FIPS compliance validation on Rocky Linux 8.6. We're almost done with that. We're getting that over to the government labs for validation here shortly. But to be blunt, that's $1 million investment right there.
Wow.
That's a massive undertaking. And we're giving that away to the community. Like, that's not even going in CIQ's name. That's going in the RESF's name for the community. And so we're giving away this gigantic thing. And we're doing the exact same thing for 9 as well. So this is these are important things, like, in my mind, to make sure that the community is getting the benefit of.
And this is a challenge that actually disqualifies a lot of open source. So for those of you not familiar or haven't heard the term FIPS, F-I-P-S, it is a mandate of which algorithms, in a very exacting way, like, this is what you're going to be using in the product, and you will not be using other algorithms in here. Flipping on the FIPS compliance is usually a government contractor. If you're part of DFARS, you're part of any of the Department of Defense stuff that you do, your company's going to have to say that the software and the things we have are compliant with that. So it's almost like in my years of being an open source advocate, it's sometimes the disqualifier why you can't use something is it may not have been FIPS compliant, and it may be completely secure. It's not a security thing. It is a compliance thing of, nope, we only allow you to use this algorithm, but this algorithm is actually more hardened and newer, but that doesn't matter. It's not on the FIPS list. I think I described that fairly well.
The one thing I may add is the FIPS process is also about a year. It's about 9 months, 12 months to get done, which means if we're going to validate a particular version like 8.6, which is what we're doing, by the time the FIPS is done, 8.7 and maybe even 8.8 is coming out. So it's a constant kind of catch-up game. And government agencies and a lot of corporate agencies that require that level of confidence in their crypto within their platform have to make a decision, like how, do they want to roll that out? Most organizations say, okay, 8.6 was FIPS qualified. We're going to make a big leap that 8.7, 8.8, 8.9, 10, etc., whatever is all also going to be FIPS validated, even though it's not pedantically still FIPS validated because they validate the binaries. It gives them the confidence that they need to feel good about that operating system or that platform.
Yeah. And that's once you get into the enterprise market, that's a box that has to be checked quite a bit.
Yeah. And do you feel like you're going to get an influx of users once that's done?
I think we already have even. So Hyperion Research, which is an analyst organization, recently did a survey to organizations across the board. And they found that, I think the number was 38. I can look at, no, I'm not going to look it up right now, but it was near 40% of government organizations are already on Rocky Linux.
Wow.
So
that's got to feel really great. To see that success.
It's massive. I mean, the uptake has just been crazy. It's been their average across all, I think, was 20.4% of the ecosystem is already running on Rocky Linux. So I mean, again, it really is massive. I'll pull that up and I'll send that over to you, and if you can share that out to the community.
Yeah, we'll throw it in the show notes.
But yeah, it's massive, the amount of uptake that there's been, and I think enterprise organizations are really responding well to the idea and the vision of what the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation (RESF) is set out to do, which is to better join and better unite open source communities and individual contributors to enterprise needs. Enterprise needs are not always in alignment with the community, and to how to balance that is a trick, right? It's a task. So that's what the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation was designed to do. We recently elected the RESF board, and we're about ready to have a update on the board structure coming out actually very soon now. And but just to give an example, Greg Crowe-Hartman, who maintains the Linux stable kernel, right? Linus Torvalds maintains the development kernel. Greg Crowe-Hartman maintains the stable kernel. He's on our board of directors. Chris DeBona, who from Google, he was the person who was responsible for releasing things like Kubernetes and Android to the world. He's on our board of directors, and I mean, and lots of contributors to the project is on a board of directors, but those are two of our independents. It's fantastic to see how this has grown, but I think we're really doing something that's important for the enterprise, specifically the professional IT communities.
I'm sure there's like a countless number of people that are very thankful for that, because it probably allowed people to go from, oh my God, what do we do in the boardroom, to that's the way forward right there, to actually have a solution. And I feel like for a lot of people that was probably very relieving, especially when it was uncertain. People didn't really understand the change and didn't understand why CentOS Stream is the new normal and all these other things. I think it's great to have some kind of status quo, something to rely on, something, a path forward that doesn't require changing your entire base to a completely unrelated distribution, which is even worse, I think.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yep, that would be a big undertaking. I mean, I know that I think Rocky Linux is on the consideration for the path forward at some point with XCP-NG and the team over at Vates there. And it's because it's funny when I've seen, because I talked to Oliver, who's the team lead. They're like, well, can't you guys just switch over to Debian? He's like, you don't understand how deeply embedded a hypervisor base OS that's very customized is. You can't just rip it out and replace. It's got to be a lot of compatibility here. Like,
right.
The infrastructure is built around it. So
the name of the Apache package isn't even the same. I mean, every little detail, every little thing you need to install is going to have either a different name, or maybe a package could be split more in one than the other, combined somewhere else. I mean, there's a lot of different moving pieces here, and I don't think a lot of people understand the gravity. I think they understand in general that this is a lot of work, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, unless you do the work, you can't really know what it's like, you know?
Yeah, I would say that for sure.
Yeah.
Till you've actually built an entire distribution, you don't know how hard it is to build a distribution.
And it's
Right.
gotten so much harder. I can validate for that. It's gotten
And
so much more difficult. Yeah, early versions of CentOS was nowhere near as difficult as it is now.
oh wow, yeah. I can imagine a lot more packages nowadays than we had before, for sure.
Yeah. And securing that build pipeline, not just documenting it, but also securing it, like you mentioned. You can't go a week without another insert name of pipeline that got something injected, some type of typo squatting. It's a constant security threat, and I deal a lot with security, so it's just like uh
Yep.
it's like dealing with the threats of the currently broken software, let alone someone slipping in a breakage in the software or some potential vulnerability. I'm like, no, this is hard.
We don't want a supply chain attack, thank you very much.
Yeah.
One of the
Nope.
things that we wanted to do with Peridot is to really ensure that supply chain security is validated and transparent, so you can really trust that, and all the way from the file that ends up on your operating system through the RPM, which exists now through the validation of the RPM that knows it came from us and it hasn't been tampered with. But then how do you know that, how it was built? How do you know that there's any validity behind that? And right now, generally speaking, there's not a huge amount of validity on that. So
Right.
that's one of our goals, is to make sure that there's full SBOM validation all the way through the pipeline. So anybody can go from a file that's on their system, right? Is that suspect? We don't know. Well, it's signed by the RPM. It's signed by the organization who released it. And here's the environment that they built that package. Let's reproduce that SBOM and come up with, let's do a full validation check on that SBOM. Like, that doesn't exist today. But that's one of the things that Peridot is making available at this point. We're
I
not quite there, but we're really close.
And I wish SBOM was further ahead, but boy, I brought it up in a security conference, and the number of shockingly security people in the IT services space that didn't even familiar with the term. And I'm like, yes, software bill of materials. We want to know the ingredients, how the sauce was made. And I mean, this is on the heels of Log4j when I brought it up at the conference going, did you know your product was built with Log4j? Or do you know what products were built with that dependency? And having a bill of materials is huge. And I think open source
Yeah.
is way ahead of the curve in terms of advantage of being the better way to go in the path forward. I've been a long time advocate of it. It's getting proven more and more. So I'm glad you brought up SBOM. Like, it's not talked about enough. I'm like, it's
Right.
2023, people. This should be just part of what is included when you buy software or
Yeah.
use software.
Totally agree. Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, very important, and it's only gonna be more important going
Yep.
forward, so
All right. Well,
absolutely.
this was a lot of fun. Do you have any more questions, Jays? Got reaching the top of the hour here.
I mean, I probably have a zillion more, but I think, I gotta stop at some point.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll have to have him on again and ask a zillion more questions. Jay also
Yeah.
has another podcast that dives into Linux, so there's always lots of opportunity to talk about some more of these things, especially the security side of things. So
Yep, there absolutely is, and maybe that could be something. I'll email you about that, see if you're
yeah,
interested.
Absolutely. That sounds like a
Yep.
lot of fun. And this conversation was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you both. Thank you for inviting me.
yeah,
No
and thank you for
problem.
taking the time. This was great, and thanks everyone for joining us. Take care, and see you next episode.
Thank you.
Bye.